Today, we have a big question. With inflation, higher interest rates, and a likely recession, what are the Disney parks going to look like in 2023? And how will they be different than they are today? And if you're thinking about a vacation or arranging a day visit or wondering about the possibility of annual pass sales opening back up, what does all this mean for you? And what might the economic downturn mean for the return of the Disney dining plan or upper-end experiences like the Galactic Star Cruiser? And at what point will Disney be most likely to offer big discounts? The question today is, how does Disney as a company typically respond to a recession? If you look at recent recessions, there are recurring strategies that Disney has used to move through difficult times. The topic is complex with many interrelated components and some unique conditions related to 2022. There are significant downsides ahead, but also some good news in the mix. So if you're ready, let's look into that economic crystal ball and piece together where Disney and the Disney parks will be in 6 or 12 months from now. Let's start here. For the American parks, 2022 was a recovery year. After being locked up for months and months, families yearned to return to the parks in force. Once the wave of Omicron subsided in March, attendance was up in both the California and Florida parks, and up significantly. In terms of crowd levels, even with reservations, some days felt like the world before the pandemic, with crowds thick through Fantasyland, strollers 10 deep outside of It's a Small World, and people packed in to watch the fireworks on Main Street. But this type of pent-up demand wasn't the only factor that led to higher crowds. In Florida, another factor was DVC contracts. DVC families can bank their points for a year, but they can't bank them indefinitely. By 2022, many families had points that they needed to spend before they expired. Beyond this, travel simply felt safer in the spring and summer of 2022 than it had in 2 years. Though there was a midsummer surge of COVID, it was far less severe than previous surges, and more importantly, infections from this surge were viewed as less severe than infections from previous variants. Due to vaccines, therapeutics, previous infections, and a virus strain that perhaps produced a weaker infection, hospitalizations remained low, and therefore mass entertainment like theme parks seemed safer. Lastly, by mid-2022, travel was less difficult than it had been in years. For overseas travelers, many travel restrictions were lifted. And in terms of the parks themselves, nearly all mask and COVID-related capacity requirements had been removed or ameliorated. During the summer of 2022, I believe the only place at a Disney park in the U.S. that had a mask requirement was the first aid office, similar to that of many doctors' offices. The crowds came, they filled up the park. From spring through summer, there was very little ebb and flow between days when the parks were packed and days when they were not. Even after Halloween ended, the California parks remained particularly busy, including on weekdays. The only times that the California parks presently are empty are on weekdays before noon. For both coasts, this type of elevated demand allowed Disney to keep prices at a high level in terms of tickets, food, souvenirs, and hotels. In Florida, however, by mid-August, the parks began to empty out. The area outside of Small World was no longer a flotilla of strollers, and Main Street, in that hour leading up to the fireworks, was no longer an endless sea of humanity camping out for the show. The wave of pent-up travel was over. Those who wanted to visit the Florida parks after 2 years of confinement had done so, and those who needed to spend their DVC points had booked their rooms, visited, and gone home. The crowds at Disney World dipped in the fall, as they usually do. In most years, crowds return often to their highest points over the winter holidays and during spring break. But there are factors this year that suggest that this may not happen, that the American resorts, Florida in particular, are moving into another difficult cycle, this time due to a sagging economy. The sale of nearly everything that the Walt Disney Company produces relies on families having disposable income. From this perspective, Disney movies, toys, clothes, and certainly their vacations are a small luxury, something that families don't necessarily need, but are a purchase that they enjoy or that make them feel good. During periods of economic expansion, entertainment companies like Disney tend to do well. During periods of economic retraction, they do less well, as customers have less to spend on non-essential purchases. Leadership at American entertainment companies need to accurately forecast when the country is moving into a robust economy and when it's moving into a recession, in terms of prioritizing their hiring and capital investments for new projects. And this is where we are right now, with economists and CEOs trying to predict where the American economy is moving in the near future. And in this episode, we're exploring how this might affect the Disney Company and particularly the parks. A recession happens when there is more demand for goods than there are goods themselves, essentially when supply and demand move significantly out of balance. Over the past year, two key factors have contributed to this imbalance. One has to do with supply, and the other has to do with a recent period of prosperity. First, manufacturers have seen a shortage of raw materials and other supplies, which is often referred to as problems with the supply chain, leading them to produce fewer products. Part of this is related to a slow recovery from the pandemic, particularly in China, which still has COVID lockdowns causing delays in the productions of component goods, such as computer chips. Another part is related to the war in Ukraine, which has limited the world's supply of oil, making transportation and shipping more expensive. The other part of this equation is related to the hot economy of the last 12 to 18 months. Low unemployment, low interest loans, and in some cases, elevated wages, which have given workers more money to purchase goods and services, even though there are fewer goods to purchase. And this is where the cycle starts. Because of decreased supply and an increased ability for many workers to buy goods and services, companies charge higher prices, which produces inflation. A low rate of inflation, such as 2%, is generally believed to help an economy grow in beneficial ways. But a higher rate of inflation, let's say 4% and above, is generally viewed to be problematic for an economy as it devalues the currency and makes it difficult for families to purchase necessary items such as food, housing, and energy. Excessive inflation is particularly problematic when prices rise at a rate significantly higher than that of wages. During these periods, families have less purchasing power and need to more carefully spend the money that they do have, cutting off unnecessary purchases, such as meals out, various entertainment options, and vacations, particularly expensive vacations. Vacations typically are among the very first things that a family will cut or reduce during a recession. Runaway inflation, if left unchecked, can decimate an economy, eroding the value of savings and devaluing a country's currency. To reduce inflation, a government body, such as the Federal Reserve, will raise interest rates, which increases the cost to borrow money. When interest rates are low, companies will borrow money to begin new projects and expand their business. But when interest rates are high, companies are less likely to borrow money. Likewise, when interest rates are low, families are more willing to take on debt to buy a house or a car or even to fund a vacation, but they are less likely or perhaps unwilling to do so when interest rates are high. These patterns together lead to a reduction in the economy, during which time fewer goods and services are purchased, which in turn often leads to an increase in unemployment, and that's a typical recession. But what we're seeing right now may not be a typical recession, at least not yet. At the moment, it's clear that high inflation is causing many families to watch what they spend. The cost of many goods over the past year has gone up by 8.2%, but hardly anyone's income has increased by nearly that amount. Some essential items are up by even more than 8.2%. The cost of food has risen by 11.2%, gas by 18.2%, and the cost of housing in some large cities is up even more. In short, people presently have less purchasing power with the money that they have. These elements often signal that a country is moving into a recession, a period when unemployment increases, wages remain static, and companies see lower profits. But in the current mix of conditions, there are some outlier indicators. For example, unemployment remains very low, and those who do have jobs have reasonable bargaining power to increase their wages, as there is a shortage of people looking for work, particularly in some skilled areas. Just look at any restaurant at Disney World. There's still not enough people to fully staff the kitchens because Disney can't find people to fill those positions. The same is true in housekeeping and some other areas at the Florida resort. In the middle of the summer, economists examining the data disagreed on where the country was headed, if the U.S. would in fact see a recession. The United States did have rising interest rates and a higher cost of products. There was an imbalance between supply and demand. Both of these can be a sign of a coming recession, but the U.S. didn't have a reduction in salaries or low levels of full employment. In July, the Wall Street Journal surveyed economists about a possible recession. At that time, economists overall believed that there was a 49% chance that America would enter a recession in the next 12 months. But in August and September, inflation and interest rates continued to climb. In October, the journal surveyed economists yet again and discovered that they now felt that there was a 63% chance that America would move into a recession in the next 12 months, and that companies early in 2023 would lay off employees to account for a reduction in demand. In a recession, this often creates a pattern. Because there is less demand for products, companies reduce their workforce, which means that families have less money to buy things, which further decreases demands for those products, which then prompts another wave of layoffs. This can be a vicious cycle that slowly erodes an economy over many months. Similarly, a recent survey conducted by the Conference Board, which is a global think tank, found that 98% of CEOs surveyed now felt that the U.S. would move into a recession in the next 12 to 18 months. But if you dig down into those numbers, you'll find that there are two different stories in the mix. 85% of CEOs said that the U.S. by itself was headed toward a brief and shallow recession, while 13% believed that the U.S. would enter a deep recession. The forecast for Europe, however, was worse. 98% believed that the European Union would enter a recession in the next 12 to 18 months, but 68% believed that the European recession would be a deep one, in part due to the war in Ukraine and a reduction in Russian-supplied energy, while only 31% believed it would be mild. A separate survey of over 1,300 CEOs conducted by the accounting firm KPMG showed similar results. Specifically, that 91% of those CEOs surveyed by KPMG also believed that the U.S. would enter a recession by the middle of summer 2023. I should also point out that even if financial conditions don't push the U.S. into a recession, a widespread forecast by experts of a likely recession is often enough to change the minds of some families as to whether this is the best year to book a $5,000 or $8,000 Disney World vacation or cruise. The belief that difficult financial times might lie ahead, or the belief that ongoing employment is less reliable, will make families more cost-conscious and less likely to book expensive vacations. The mass psychology of a culture by itself can start or intensify a recession, because the belief that a recession is coming will cause families to spend less, which leads companies to sell less, which leads to layoffs, which contributes to that vicious cycle we talked about earlier. The current concern about a recession is troubling for both of the American Disney resorts. The industry sectors that are most affected by a recession include those related to large purchases, such as real estate, and those related to discretionary spending, such as restaurants, hotels, travel, entertainment, and tourism. Essentially, a recession threatens key products and services produced by Disney. But within the tourism industry, the prospect of a recession is far more troubling for Disney World than it is for the Disneyland Resort. Disneyland remains a regional park, drawing most of its visitors from Southern California. Most people visiting Disneyland simply get in a car, visit the park or parks, and then drive home. The most common length of stay at Disneyland is still just 1 day. Because it's a single-day experience, Disneyland costs far less to visit than does a typical Disney World vacation. Because of this, Disney World remains far more vulnerable to an attendance downturn because its business model is arranged around guests planning a multi-day visit. The average length of stay for a Disney-centered vacation in Florida is 6 days. So, if it's true that a recession is likely headed our way, how then can Disney respond to minimize the financial loss at its resorts? Disney World and Disneyland have been through many recessions, and there's essentially a Disney playbook for an unfavorable economy. In 2001, the Disney park saw a substantial dip in attendance as no one wanted to travel on a plane or visit an American icon after September 11th, with fears that terrorists would strike planes again or strike a large public gathering place such as a baseball game, Times Square, or a theme park. In the years that followed, attendance grew steadily from 2002 to 2007, but then at the start of the Great Recession, attendance dipped for the first time in 6 years. During the second quarter of 2009, Disney saw a 46% drop in net income as the recession moved through its worst months. To manage the recession, Disney World essentially had a choice between two models: either close up some hotel wings and keep profit per guest at pre-recession levels, or lower the cost of a Disney World vacation to keep its hotels and parks full. No doubt, accountants worked through the projections to figure out which of these two paths would produce the most profit for the company. At the time, Laura Martin, a media analysis, said, quote, "It's a horrible choice. Either your hotels are empty, but per room spending isn't so bad, or you fill them up with 3 days free, but spending gets decimated per room." There are those companies who have found that it is financially better to never or hardly ever put their products on sale. Companies such as Tiffany, Louis Vuitton, Chanel, and for the most part Apple, because they will make more money overall by identifying their merchandise as premium products not needing a sale, even if that means they sell fewer products during a recession. Mostly, these are products that are marketed to upper-end consumers. Disney parks, though they like to present themselves as luxury experiences, are actually marketed to the middle class. The Disney World Deluxe hotels, though expensive, offer services and amenities significantly below the level of true luxury hotels. In terms of a marketing image, Disney presents the Grand Floridian as a type of luxury hotel mostly for the upper middle class, but the truly wealthy have higher levels of hotels nearby. I know that all this seems a little nitpicky, but it will matter later. Now back to our main idea. In 2009, during the Great Recession, Bob Iger, then the CEO of Disney, explained why Disney discounted products and services at its resorts. Quote, "We made a conscious decision to put in place promotions that would drive attendance. This strategy has had a predictable impact on margins, but it's also had the intended effect of bringing people to our parks." In short, Disney World, as it's tied to the middle class and to levels of their income, needed to adjust to the recession by discounting many elements at the resort. That is, the luxury image of a Disney World vacation is mostly that of an illusion cooked up by a marketing team, and during a recession, Disney would be ill-advised to act like Louis Vuitton or Chanel. Instead, it should act like Polo or Nike or Kate Spade by temporarily putting things on sale to move inventory. And this is exactly what Disney did in 2009. It had sale after sale after sale. It offered discounts on hotel rooms, on tickets, on dining. One of its best offers during that recession was this, quote, "Guests who buy a 4-night, 4-day, non-discounted Walt Disney Travel Company Magic Your Way hotel and ticket package for stays most nights will receive 3 extra nights of hotel accommodations and 3 more days added to their theme park tickets for free. As a bonus, guests traveling on this package will also receive a free $200 Disney gift card to splurge on merchandise, dining, or other Disney fun." But this description by itself doesn't explain how deep Disney needed to discount hotels and tickets to fill those rooms. A family of 4 could stay in a value hotel such as Pop Century for 7 nights and have 7 days worth of tickets to the parks for a grand total of $1,375. That works out to less than $50 per person per day, and they get a gift card for $200 on top of this. In terms of the 2 American resorts, in Florida, the big limiter for consumers was the cost of the hotel rooms. This promotion managed that barrier. But in California, the big limiter was the cost of admission tickets. So in California, Disneyland, instead of focusing on the price of hotel rooms, simply gave away tickets for free, millions and millions of them. This was the official Disneyland announcement for 2009. Quote, "Birthdays are the one occasion that we all share every year," said Jay Rizzullo, chairman of Walt Disney Parks and Resorts. "We thought a free birthday ticket would be the icing on the cake as we extend this new celebration vacation trend to Disney parks." In Florida, the hope was that Disney would make money off of meals and souvenirs. In California, Disney hoped that guests would bring friends who needed to purchase a ticket to celebrate with a birthday boy or girl inside the park. Because of this heavy discounting, according to the second quarter 2009 financial report, overall admissions during this period only dropped 1% at Disney World. At Disneyland, they actually increased by 2%, in part because Disney gave away millions of free tickets, and in part because Southern California locals were choosing to visit local attractions during their vacation as opposed to flying to far-off locales. But even during this period, the Disney resorts in America, due to lower guest spending, were forced to reduce their workforce by 1,900 cast members. These cuts happened in spring 2009. 1,200 cast members were simply laid off, mostly from the Florida resort, and another 700 empty positions were left unfilled. Because of these sales on tickets and hotel rooms, which were substantial, the 2009 recession impacted the American resorts far less than it did other companies, which saw far more substantial layoffs. The 2009 plan will likely be the basis for how Disney approaches a 2023 recession, assuming that a recession is on the horizon and assuming that attendance begins to dip at the American resorts. To break all of this down a little more, and so we can understand how the parks are likely to change in the months ahead, let's look at the revenue centers for both the California and the Florida resorts. And before I jump into this analysis, I want to point out 2 elements that will make the response to the coming recession different than to that of the Great Recession. First of all, no one expects a recession in 2023 to be anywhere near as severe as the one back in 2009. Second, back in 2009, Disney had very little in the pipeline in terms of new attractions to elevate interest in its parks. At Disney World, promotions during this period were centered on the American Idol experience at Hollywood Studios and the Kim Possible World Showcase adventure at Epcot. And out in California, there was literally nothing. Entire promotions were arranged around a street party called Celebrate, where kids could dance alongside Disney characters. The situation in 2023 will be different. As we now know from the expo, Disney is moving into a period of minimal investment in large new attractions, probably at least until 2025. That is, if you remove out existing attractions that are simply being rethemed. But before that dry spell happens, both California and Florida each have one last big attraction to open. Disneyland will open Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway in January. Disney World will open the Tron Coaster in spring. A date hasn't yet been announced, but my guess, Disney will keep an eye on winter attendance to gauge the severity of the recession and then decide when in spring they will likely get the most mileage out of a new attraction. Again, my guess, a slightly later date in April or May that leads directly into summer may now look a little better than a slightly earlier date arranged around spring break vacations. Regardless, both resorts will use these attractions to leverage attendance during a period that is projected to be part of a recession. But beyond these new attractions, which will be used as attendance drivers, what other tools is Disney likely to use to increase attendance in the year ahead? For most people, as we've already discussed, the single highest cost of a Disneyland visit is that admission ticket. So to entice people to go to the park, they can lower the price of tickets. There's a number of ways this can happen, but the most common is targeted discounts for locals. Disneyland typically, each year, discounts tickets for locals between early January and late May. But there are a number of ways that discounts can be arranged as 2-day, 3-day, weekday-only tickets. Disneyland can also shorten or lengthen the period of the discount depending on how many more people they need to visit the park during this period. It's possible that we might see slightly more flexible or generous ticket offers this January. One recent promotion offered 3-day Southern California tickets, which could be used Monday through Thursday for $250, while similar tickets on a slightly different offer that could be used through the weekends cost $300. But at the moment, there are two elements working against more generous Southern California discounts next year. First, the opening of Mickey and Minnie's will elevate interest in the park without substantial discounts. And second, Disneyland isn't yet seeing a meaningful reduction of visitors. I've been in the American parks on both coasts in Florida and California each month for a while now, and it's clear that there are two different stories playing out on the different coasts. Locals continue to flock to Disneyland, filling the park even this past week. A typical weekend has parks at the Disneyland Resort full from mid-morning till the end of the day. A typical weekday has relatively empty parks until noon, but then as people get off work and from school, the parks fill up to near capacity in the late afternoon and evening. As a side observation, if you're visiting Disneyland in California in the near future, you should force yourself to arrive at park opening. You can easily visit more attractions without hardly any lines between 8 a.m. and noon than you can between noon and 8 p.m. when queues even for the Lightning Lane fill up. The coming economic downturn hasn't yet affected the California resort, though if inflation and interest rates keep going up, it will eventually affect the California parks though this may not happen until a few months into 2023, as we'll discuss in a moment. In Florida, however, the parks began to empty out in late August. Though Disney World does have locals who visit the parks, Epcot in particular for its festivals, the Florida parks are mainly filled with traditional tourists who book multi-day vacations. These are the guests who are now missing in part from the parks, those concerned about the thousands of dollars necessary to book even a short family trip to Florida. And just as in 2009, Disney, relying on their familiar playbook, has engaged the first wave of discounts designed to lure guests back to the parks. As with those previous recessions, the initial wave of discounts are targeted at hotels. Some version of these discounts are open to almost anyone. Disney Plus subscribers can save 20% on rooms during the peak holiday period. Pass holders can save up to 25% on most dates between now and April 30th. If you stay 5 nights or more, you can save 30%. Disney Visa card holders can save 25%, Florida residents can save 20%, and so on. The only recession I can think of in which Florida discounts were not initially targeted at the hotels was the economic downturn after September 11th, when most Americans refused to fly for any reason. During that downturn, when even absolutely free hotel rooms wouldn't have lured families onto planes, Disney World turned to annual pass holders to fill the parks. It offered any Florida resident who purchased an annual pass, which was good to all of the parks and both of the water parks, an extra 100-day extension before that pass expired. In essence, you could buy a 15-month pass for $275.50 if you were also a AAA member. This discount started on October 5th, 2001, roughly 3 weeks after the attacks, when the parks were near empty. That same pass for 15 months would now cost roughly $1,800. But to get back to 2022, which has a different set of concerns than 2001, no one right now is concerned in the same way about the safety of air travel. Families are more concerned about inflation and possible layoffs in the near future. If those CEOs, which we mentioned earlier, are right in their survey answers, and this recession actually develops, these discounts are likely to expand beyond those currently offered for hotels. Surveyed CEOs believed overwhelmingly that a shorter recession would hit the U.S. in 2023, but a longer and deeper recession due to the war in Ukraine and various energy problems would descend on the European Union. Europe is one of the largest markets for Walt Disney World, so even if the recession is shorter in the U.S., a deep recession overseas is a large problem for the Florida resort. If this happens, one of the big questions would be, how will Disney target discounts beyond sales on hotel rooms, and who then will benefit? In the past 2 decades, one of the most familiar ways for Disney World to shore up soft demand was to offer free or heavily discounted dining plans. But the problem with this approach is that Disney World doesn't presently have the labor, particularly skilled labor in its kitchens, to fully open all of its restaurants and restart a dining plan. Some of their restaurants are still only open 5 days a week, and many restaurants are operating with a partial staff. I have endless experiences of enjoying a meal in a presumably sold-out Disney World restaurant, only to discover that sold out means that a third of the tables remain empty due to a lack of labor. In some of these restaurants, they don't even set those tables with silverware. Beyond the empty tables, many restaurants that before the pandemic offered breakfast no longer offer that meal, which is a staffing issue. And some key character elements haven't returned to restaurants at all, as there is a shortage of people who are trained to perform as Disney characters. My take is that Disney World cannot support a free or discounted dining promotion, or really any dining plan at all, until it first fills the thousands of restaurant jobs that remain open around the resort. It's possible that layoffs in other industries will drive workers back to Disney World to fill some of these positions, but that hasn't happened yet. But here too, there are unique barriers. One of the underlying reasons as to why there are so many openings in restaurants, hotels, and elsewhere in the tourism industry is that many of the cast members who were laid off during the pandemic were laid off far longer than employees in other fields. Because of this, some of these former cast members made a conscious decision to find work in other sectors so that future disruptions did not affect them as deeply. I should also point out that these problems are far more prevalent out at the Florida resort than they are at the California resort. So instead of discounted or free dining plans, I think it's more likely for Disney World to look to other options, including some that cost Disney very little. Disney, for example, could give away Genie Plus, or it could give away paid lightning lanes. I don't think we'll see the buy 4 get 3 free promotion. The economic situation would need to get truly bad, 2009 level bad, for a promotion like that to appear. But maybe we'll get a smaller version of that. Buy 3 days and maybe get 1 free. And there's a way here in a free day promotion for Disney to balance the labor costs, to make people think that they are getting more than they're actually getting. At the moment, the Magic Kingdom typically has operating hours from 9 in the morning until either 10 p.m. or 11 p.m. at night. If a guest right now buys a 3-day ticket to visit the parks, they'd have roughly 40 hours of possible access to the Magic Kingdom. But let's say that Disney World shortens up those hours, with the Magic Kingdom opening at 9 a.m. but closing at 7 p.m. most nights. A guest with a buy 3 and get 1 day free ticket would still only have 40 hours of possible access to the Magic Kingdom, with those same 40 hours spread out not over 3 days, but over 4 days. A promotion like this, coupled with a reduction of operating hours, offers the appearance of a guest getting more than they actually will get. Beyond this, there's another problem that Disney has in 2022 that it didn't have back in 2009. On-property rooms used to have many additional perks, such as extra magic hours at the parks, free parking at the resort, free transportation to and from the airport, and so on. In the past few years, Disney has unbundled these services from the hotel room package, but without lowering the cost of its rooms. We've explored ways to thoughtfully evaluate these benefits related to cost in that guide that we're building over on Bandcamp. But there are far less benefits bundled into a Disney room package right now than there were in recent years. And because of this, some off-property rooms, some of which are even closer to the parks than certain Disney rooms, may look like a better bargain, especially to families wishing to minimize costs. That is to say that the level of discounting that Disney now may need to engage in to get those guests into its on-property rooms, as opposed to similar Marriott or Hilton options just off-property, may be higher in 2023 than it was in recent years. That is, if a family is mostly focused on cost right now, 25% off a room at Caribbean Beach is a poor value compared to a similar but less expensive room at a nearby Marriott. And this is something for both potential guests and resort managers to consider. But beyond the parks and the regular hotels, there's a Disney operation in Florida that simply is not going to move through a recession very well, likely no matter what Disney does. Last year, we predicted that the Galactic Star Cruiser, that 2-day experience priced between $5,000 and $6,000 for a typical family, would sell well through the holiday season of 2022, largely supported by longtime Star Wars fans. But once those longtime Star Wars fans experienced it once, the resort would have a very difficult time filling those rooms. With a possible recession on the horizon, however, lower sales have already arrived for the Galactic Star Cruiser. The holiday period is not fully booked, and at this point it's very unlikely that it will reach capacity. You can presently book a cabin on December 22nd or December 24th during what is almost always the busiest week of the year. At the moment, some 2-day adventures are so under capacity that the 2 seatings for dinner have been reduced to just 1. When it opened to manage capacity, the Star Cruiser offered 2 dinner times, as the dining room didn't have space for all the guests that were in its rooms. The hotel was more or less designed that way. On some recent adventures, however, the Star Cruiser has cut back to a single dinner service, and even for that, the dining room is not completely full. It's clear that during slow periods, the Star Wars adventure is now running at less than 50% capacity, perhaps significantly less. But labor for the experience is not deeply scalable. The Star Cruiser can cut back on servers, bartenders, and housekeeping, but the most expensive elements of the cruise, including all of the performers and the theatrical team, need to be fully staffed on each cruise, no matter how few rooms are full. And starting January 1st, every single adventure on the Galactic Star Cruiser, except for one which is likely a special event, is wide open in terms of available reservations for the next 9 months. If middle-class families are worried about their economic future, even if they have the money for a vacation, these upper-end add-on experiences will be the first thing to go. As the Star Cruiser has mostly experienced positive reviews, the downturn in reservation rates is almost surely cost-driven. And because it's cost-driven, meaning that families are uncomfortable with that level of spending at the present moment, then minor changes to the experience, for example with holiday experiences or a new story or new characters, are not going to fill those rooms. If there is an economic downturn in 2023, Disney may need to revisit how often the Star Cruiser sails through the stars. Maybe during those slow months it has just 1 excursion during the week as opposed to the present 2 or 3. Or maybe the Star Cruiser is discounted for those who book a certain number of days at a Disney hotel. Or maybe the midweek price is offered at a very steep discount. I suspect that Disney is already looking at this very obvious problem, as a correction for the Star Cruiser will likely need to be treated differently than a correction to other aspects of its resort business. Most of the economic forecasts so far have been bad, but I should point out that in these projections, there is one condition that may be very helpful to longtime Disney World and Disneyland fans. For months and months, Disney World has paused sales of annual passes, except for one Florida Residence Pass. In California, Disneyland has paused sales of all the Magic Key passes. Disney, as a business, acts in its own financial interests. The pauses to these sales have been possible because both Disney World and Disneyland have attracted a significant number of day guests who spend more than annual pass holders when visiting the resorts. Attendance at Disney World as we've previously noted, has already dropped off. There will, of course, be an uptick during the holidays, maybe not as large of an uptick as a typical year, but still an uptick. Attendance at Disneyland has not yet dropped, but it may in the months to come, particularly in late spring after interest in Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway dies down. Last I asked Disney World managers about annual passes, which was this past July, I was told specifically that no one at that time was even talking about the possibility of opening annual pass sales at the moment. But as attendance goes down, Disney will be financially incentivized to reintroduce a wider range of annual passes to the public. I'm guessing this will start first in Florida. After the holiday spike, I expect we'll see lower attendance in Florida. How low will depend on inflation, interest rates, and possible layoffs. And if attendance is projected to be down for months, Disney will be incentivized to reintroduce annual passes to bring back more people into the park. The California story will be slightly different. The opening of Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway will sustain guest interest in the resort, but for how long? That will depend on a few key factors. If the recession is mild and short, perhaps Disneyland can simply move through the recession without significant changes to its current business model concerning Magic Key passes. But if the recession is longer or more severe than anticipated, that will push Disneyland toward Magic Key sales. Also, one county over, Universal Hollywood is expected to open Super Nintendo World in March, which will likely shift some theme park interest and theme park attendance from Disney to Universal, which may also incentivize Disney to open Magic Key sales to keep its parks relatively full. But even in all this, there's one more unique concern that circles the California parks. As longtime Disneyland fans recall, the promotion of relatively inexpensive annual passes in 2009, passes that could be paid off in monthly installments, led to a significant expansion of the passholder program, which in the years that followed caused mass crowding at Disneyland, particularly on the weekends. And so, if current executives remember those problems, and I would say that's an if, maybe Disneyland, if they do reopen Magic Key sales, might open them strategically. Maybe the resort opens Magic Key levels that allow guests to visit only on weekdays. And likely the Disneyland Resort will keep Magic Key pricing at a high level to balance supply and demand among available reservation slots. But if we start to see a multi-month decline in park attendance in California, a shift in Magic Key sales is one of the tools that Disney can use to correct the problem related to lower attendance. At the moment, despite the generally upbeat sentiment of Disney investor calls and despite a period of robust attendance at its parks, particularly from March through early August 2022, the next year, 2023, is shaping up to be a different experience than the year that's about to fade away, with the resorts focused on economic problems rather than on problems stemming from COVID. The Tron Coaster is scheduled to open sometime this spring. As with all new e-ticket attractions, it is specifically designed to drive increased attendance at the resort. But if that wave of projected visitation does not materialize, particularly for those Disney on-property hotels, then come next August, I suspect we'll see more aggressive discounting than what we presently see for the first half of 2023. In California, Mickey and Minnie's is scheduled to open on January 27th. But if that attraction only produces a short elevation in visitation, you can expect some other discounts as the year moves forward, especially if interest rates and inflation remain high, coupled possibly with rising unemployment. At the moment, many economists are looking over the breach and wondering what lies ahead. Some significant indicators, such as inflation and interest rates, suggest we're moving into a recession. Disneyland and Disney World, over years, have established strategies for a recession. What specific strategies they use, however, and how well they work this time is yet to be seen. But that is something that we will all experience together as we talk about changes to the Disney company and the Disney experience in the months ahead. I'll be back next week with a new show, the beginning of a series that will explore the history of the studio and the parks. But hopefully from today's episode, you have something to think about in terms of where Disney is moving in the months ahead. If you're looking at a vacation, you'll find that there's now discounts. But if there is a recession, there's the potential for better discounts later in 2023. If you're merely thinking about how to plan out next year, maybe today's episode helps you put those plans together. Decide what you want to do, whether that be Disney or some other experience, in a way that financially fits your comfort levels. And if you're simply interested in the current state of the Disney company, hopefully today's episode helps you explore likely economic pressures that the company faces and how, at least from a historical basis, they respond to them. Aside from recording a new episode for next Sunday, this week I'll also put up another section for our ongoing audio guide to Disney World. It's slowly coming together. And also, this coming Friday, I'll be down at Disneyland as the park rolls out its holiday decorations and festivities. In terms of the parks, the winter holidays are by far my favorite time of the year, the period that, back when I was a kid, my family ventured to the parks each year. One last thing. We're an ad-free, listener-supported podcast. We put out a new show every week for listeners around the world to enjoy. But without subscribers, we would simply cease to exist. We do just two things: deep dives on stories related to the history of the Disney studio and parks, and news and analysis of current events as they relate to the Walt Disney Company. If you enjoy these episodes, you can support our efforts by becoming a monthly Bandcamp subscriber. On Bandcamp, you'll find dozens and dozens of extra episodes, but the best reason to subscribe is to make sure that this podcast continues to exist. You can subscribe at dhipodcast.bandcamp.com. I'll also leave a link down in the show notes. Until next time, this is Todd James Pierce.